Oh,
Hi,
how are you?
how you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Happy Tuesday.
Yes, happy Tuesday. I'm so glad we have a chance to get together here. I'm
Yeah, me too.
actually fresh off listening to a podcast about nutrition and its effect on the immune system. So I was really excited to hop on this interview with you and talk about just the importance of really good nutrition. So thank you so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, maybe a good place to start is why don't you share a little bit about why you're passionate about nutrition and how that motivated and inspired you to really devote your life to the study of nutrition and helping people with it?
Sure, yeah. So what my journey I think is very similar to a lot of other dietitians, and it's a selfish journey, right? Where a lot of the reason why I became inspired to learn so much about, the human body and specifically more into gut health and hormones is because of my own struggles. I, from a very young age, struggled with digestive issues. They were throwing me back from doctor to doctor, trying to figure out why I had, excruciating pain all the time and really bad stomach aches and so many foods that I couldn't eat. And ultimately, found myself in my adulthood now, on several different medications with still not feeling the way that I wanted to feel as a full-time athlete. And, I said, I'm really going to start learning more about what I can do to take care of myself. And once I started learning, it was like there was no turning back. I was just jaw to the floor of wow, diet impacts so many different things. And I started doing little experiments with my own health and my lifestyle even. And once I started changing things, I noticed I started to feel better, and not just physically, but I noticed that I also started to feel better mentally. And that's when I really became passionate about the gut brain connection and the connection between our gut and our brain in terms of the food that we eat. So once I felt that much better, I said, this is something I know so much about, and I noticed it really wasn't being talked about at the time. People really weren't aware of it. And that passion really drove me to start my business and to start helping people who were struggling with similar things and not feeling heard by the traditional medical system. And they really wanted an alternative. So that's kind of a very short version of why I got here. My father dealt with mental health issues his whole life, and he passed away when I was in college. That was a huge inspiration for me of just seeing the things that he did to not take care of himself, and just really just focus on that aspect of health in a very oversaturated industry where people think of nutrition simply as how you look versus how you feel. And that's a big part in terms of like why I do what I do.
hmm Wow, there's a lot packed in there, and I was jotting down some notes as you were talking. Before I get into those, though, I'd love to know, and for the listener as well, on the front end of this conversation, so how did you parlay this passion that really was inspired by your own personal experience, health journey, into what you do for a living? So tell me a little bit about that. Who do you help? How do you help them? And what does that look
Sure. Sure. And I'll tell you something. I'm a very creative person. I had always seen myself doing something in, the creative space. And I kind of joke now that I'm more of like a detective, a creative detective now. But I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I never wanted to start my own business. I always liked the very comfortable idea of working for somebody else and showing up to work, clocking in, clocking out. But it was that idea. Now I worked in several different hospital settings, and what I recognized was that I really couldn't help people in that setting. And so it was kind of forced upon me where I said, listen, if I'm good at this, if I seem to be able to help people, I have to start my own business because there's nobody else doing this in a way that I can do this that's sustainable. And so that's when I started Nutrition Rewired, which I did right out of working in clinical and out of my internship, which I did in Boston. Fantastic internship. Really loved the dietetic program. I learned so much from a clinical standpoint. just kind of lacking some of those more holistic functional medicine things. And now, mainly the people that I help, they struggle with digestive issues in some way or form. Or, I work with a lot of athletes in the Boston area. I work with women, I work with men. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of the different things that people struggle with. But ultimately, my biggest niche is gut health. So people that are dealing with IBS, constipation, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease. So many people struggle with digestive issues. My athletes struggle with digestion. My women in menopause struggle with, the gut microbiome shifts throughout that stage. So they struggle with gut health. I work with patients who have, unhealthy relationships with food, which impacts their digestion. So I'm very passionate about the gut because it connects to so many aspects of our health. Things like autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, mental health. We're now seeing extensive amounts of research between the link between gut and neurological conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS. And so a lot of people are struggling with those types of things as well.
So you mentioned Nutrition Rewired, and just for the listener, that's the name of your business. Matter of fact, I think your website is nutritionrewired.com. So tell us a little bit about how do you see people? How do you help people? What does that look like?
Sure. I see people virtually right now because ever since the pandemic, everything just changed, which I think is true for a lot of different people in different areas of the workforce. But I am fully virtual right now, other than corporate wellness events that I do. And it really starts with an intake form. So they fill out an initial consultation form, they fill out a food record, and then I offer a wide variety of different tests. And these are tests that are different for the most part than what you might get at a conventional appointment. So stool testing, potentially hormone testing, breath testing, which is for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, patients that struggle with, chronic bloating, constipation, diarrhea. So these are just a few of the many tests, including blood work, that clients can either do before we meet or after we meet. If they want to kind of get an evaluation, see what I would recommend based on their entire health profile. And these tests can be amazing for helping us understand a very holistic approach to a client case. And the example of this is, client comes in dealing with digestive issues. They do an endoscopy and a colonoscopy with their gastroenterologist, which is typically where your primary care provider will send you if you complain of digestive issues. And while those tests are fantastic, they are limited in terms of their scope, and they're really just focusing on what they're seeing in those scopes. They're not considering, what does the patient's diet look like? They're not considering, do they have a deficiency in something like vitamin D, which is critical for gut health and motility and inflammation in the body. So I sometimes will do these tests with clients to fill in the gaps and work with their providers to create a much more holistic experience and say, well, here are some other things that we can do to really create a better outcome for the patient.
Got it. And how do people typically find you?
Mm-hmm. It used to be strictly word of mouth, and I'm very fortunate that I have never had a problem getting clients, and I am very proud of that because what I like with word of mouth is that people clearly had a good experience with the results in terms of working together, and that's why I'm still here, is because I feel great about the ability to do that. And then I started, social media really took off for me a few years ago, and that became a big referral source for me, putting out free information. So I have a podcast where I really share a lot of, nutrition science, and I educate people to learn about their health and empower them. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on all the platforms that you can think of, LinkedIn. And so I really just put information there. And some people will be drawn to that information because maybe it's new or maybe because it's, something they're struggling with. And I do now see a lot of clients who find me from different platforms on social media, which is really cool because I've had the ability to work with patients all over the globe, who have been struggling to find the type of care that they need. And I think that's a big positive, while we know there are many negatives sometimes to social media.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. So thanks for sharing kind of a little bit of that background. I think it sort of sets the scene somewhat. And what I'm wondering now is when you talked about your own personal experience and because of that, your motivation to dive into the information, to seek out the knowledge.
Mhm.
I think about the effort it takes to do that. That's not always an effort that someone wants to spend, yet the impact of not knowing, right, that unconscious incompetence around nutrition as a topic can be life or death sometimes. Like we can be living with chronic diseases. And as you say, going to the doctor and getting sort of that reactive medical care, not the questions around lifestyle
Mhm.
that can help identify what are unconscious habits we might have that are making it worse. So what's your I know because I'm immersed in the science and it takes a lot of work, a lot of my time, and I do it out of a I just don't want to die of stuff I can prevent. Like when it comes right down to it, that's one of the, I know I'm going to eventually die, but if it's not that I get hit by a car or whatever, I really don't want it to be that it was in relation to something I could have prevented. And the
Mhm.
best prevention is knowledge. And unfortunately, the knowledge is not always readily available. And even when it is, some of like the podcasts I listen to are very complex. So
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about for somebody listening who has that spark, but they're feeling like, I just don't have a lot of time to spend doing all this self-educating.
Mhm.
What can they do?
I joke all the time about my husband. I said he wanted to learn more about nutrition ongoing, and so he just married me. So if you can marry a dietitian,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
one
obviously
way.
follow you on Instagram and
Sure,
I'll get all your handles there.
sure.
So yeah, I mean, I see where that's going, of course.
Yes, I think what's really helpful is just having a basic understanding of human physiology, picking up a anatomy and physiology book. I think most of us had to start our, if we did decide to choose the college route, there was a course that you took at one point that was anatomy and physiology. And I think just that as a good base for anything related to human nutrition science, right, which is learning about your body and what's going on in it, and even just having that baseline can be really helpful when you're viewing information online or hearing information online, because you just understand human physiology. And I think that's really powerful to understand that scientific component of it. Um, I get this question a lot about resources. Are there courses that I can take? Are there books that I can read? And I think it's really important to kind of like segment it into different categories. So if I were to, talk about sleep, I would say, what's the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker is a great overview. One of my great inspiration dietitians, she wrote a book. It's called the Manual That Should Have Come with Your Body. That's kind of like basic, human body functions, nutrition stuff. So I think there's these resources that we have that are great when we kind of pull it all together. But it's hard to find, one good resource, and that's why you have to kind of have a go-to for different aspects of health with that great base of human nutrition science.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think many of my listeners are women, and I look at the statistics when I review my podcast downloads, and it's always kind of hard to exactly decipher. But my sense is just from the people that I connect with in various ways, women in their late midlife. So let's say 40 to 40 and up, right? Versus like a
Mhm.
lot of young folks. Could be, but I think there's a lot of folks that are in that sort of 40 plus. Um, can you talk a little bit about, yes, we can get the books and we can dive in and we would love it if everybody had that initiative. Even if you didn't, are there some sort of fundamental building blocks of nutrition for women that we should be keeping in mind?
Mhm. Well, I think there's certain books that are really helpful for active women. I think Dr. Stacey Sims, she is really a pioneer in the space of women's health, perimenopause, postmenopause, in terms of like human physiology. I mean, she's the first one who kind of pioneered the idea that most of the research that we have in this space is done in men. I have a lot of her books. She's been on my podcast several times. She's, I think, really starting to pop up on Huberman Lab and stuff like that. I think she's a great resource for women. Dr. Carrie Jones, I think everybody should follow her. Casey Means. These are great physicians, doctors who can offer some wonderful information that you can follow, subscribe to their newsletters, they give out free webinars all the time, that you can watch later, if you don't have time to join live. I think those are just a few women in this space that I think are fantastic for us all to learn from, especially in that stage of life, the 40 and above, because, a lot of people aren't talking about it,
Yeah,
or at
yeah.
least in a way that's very educated.
Yeah, totally. I'm actually in the middle of Casey Means's book right now. It's definitely intense, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm balancing reading that with the Mel Robbins let them theory. I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
like reading two books at once, which I sort of hate to do. But you mentioned a number of times the gut and gut health. And the more I get the sense from listening to different podcasts, um, we learn the intricate connection between our gut and so many aspects of our health. So, can you speak a little bit about that? Because I feel like a lot of people don't, they eat, they poop, and, they don't really think about the gut.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know in the yoga space for many, many years, people were running around drinking kombucha, but I don't think anybody ever for once said, this is really good for your gut. So, let's talk a little bit about that. What comes up for you when you want to share with people about the importance of gut health and even what the gut is?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really helpful to also actually hear what we can do to improve gut health, right? Because we have all this research and these headlines that, oh, your gut's connected to your brain, and oh, your gut's connected to your immune system and cancer and this and that. Um, and so while that information is great as consumers or just humans, right, we want to know, what do we actually do to improve it? And so my job as a practitioner is to really help clients understand where they have imbalances in their gut and how that might show up in the body. So when we talk about the gut microbiome, we're not just talking about your stomach, we're talking about the bacteria, the yeast, all the different organisms that live in your digestive tract. The majority of them are actually in the lower part of the GI tract, not the stomach. They're in the large intestine. And they serve a vital purpose to many different aspects of our health. They are home to about 70% of our immune system. We digest and absorb our nutrients there, right? So if we eat something that's full of vitamins and antioxidants, we have to actually absorb that. So there's a huge role that the gut plays there. There's the connection between our mood. Our gut produces different hormones like serotonin, GABA, which is responsible for a feeling of calm. It's also responsible for activation of thyroid hormone. So conversion from T4 to T3. T3 is our active thyroid. And so we look at the patient, or I look at the patient and I say, okay, what's showing up for you? Do they have thyroid issues? Do they have nutrient deficiencies? Do they have skin issues, psoriasis, eczema, right? We see a lot of that with things like bacterial overgrowth in the gut. We see chronic yeast infections, candida in the gut. So I'm looking at the client, I'm looking at their health history, what's showing up in their symptoms. And then oftentimes we can go into the gut and look at, okay, where do we think the problem is? Do you have overgrowth? Do you have parasites? Do you have what we call intestinal permeability? It's leaky gut, right? So there's a lot of the things that we can then dig deeper and see, well, what's going on in your gut? Because we know that, yeah, generally what people will say is good for gut health is fermented foods and fiber and prebiotics and probiotics and bone broth. But that's not personalized, because if you did some of those things on that list, for example, drinking kombucha, that might actually make your gut worse depending on the bacteria and the balance of the bacteria going on in your gut. In fact, there's people that if they eat healthier, if they eat more fiber, they feel worse. And oftentimes that's a sign that there's something wrong in the gut. So those general tips about gut health can be very misleading, and they can make people feel worse, which is, they make headlines, but they don't really address, well, what does gut health mean for me, and how do I personalize it and prioritize it for myself?
Got it. Got it. Now, you mentioned a moment ago the immune system, right?
Hmm.
I think this is another thing like gut health that gets thrown around and people don't really know what is the immune system. And certainly when we lived through COVID, the immune system was all the rage, but still there wasn't a lot of clarity about what are we really talking about here.
Hmm.
So speak a little bit about what is the immune system and what is its function?
Hmm. So our immune system, it's basically a part of our body that's designed to react to outside invaders as a protective mechanism, right? So our immune system, it involves many different aspects of our health. Our body makes certain cytokines and inflammatory compounds when we get a cut on our finger, or when a virus like COVID comes into play. So we love our immune system. What we see nowadays is that there can be dysfunction in the immune system. There can either be an overreaction, which is typically what we see with autoimmune disease, right? The body is overreacting. It's reacting in a way that's not healthy to maybe a body part or something in general that we're eating. And then we see an underperforming immune system. So, right, we see suppression where the patient's not responding to outside invaders and it's not fighting off things the way that it should. With regards to gut health, we have this gut associated lymphatic tissue. So it's this tissue that's actually inside the gut, and it's responding to everything going on in that environment, from the bacteria there to the food coming in, to our stress, our lifestyle habits, all of those different things. So when I say 70% of the immune system is in the gut, I'm saying 70% of our immune system is regulated by that tissue, that gut associated lymphatic tissue. And so when patients are dealing with autoimmune disease, right, just look at the research. I mean, gut health is linked to every single autoimmune disease that we have: lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. These are conditions where there's oftentimes imbalances in the gut. So, and you spoke about COVID too, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, two main receptor sites. The first one, lungs, right? So that's why we know all these respiratory symptoms. Site number two for where this virus likes to attach is the small intestine. So we see a lot of post-COVID issues with gut health and the gut microbiome because the virus can attach itself there as well. And that's why some patients will report, oh, I had horrible digestive issues when I got COVID. And then maybe some people didn't and they had different symptoms.
Got it. So as I hear you talking, and we'll keep going through like little aspects of the science and the different parts of the body and systems of the body, it just keeps ringing in my ear that nutrition is really this critical link. And
Mhm.
yet, and yet we live in a world where it's so much more easily skewed to eat in an unhealthy way,
Mhm.
even if you are informed, because now you have to rely on your willpower, or maybe you've experienced, like yourself, such a positive shift. You don't even need to use willpower anymore because you so believe in how you're eating. I think, though, for so many people, even with awareness, they live in a world that is just filled with pitfalls and places
Mhm.
where they can get off course. I mean, not to name brands, but Starbucks is a perfect example. You can go into Starbucks and order tea, or you can go into Starbucks and order a myriad of other things, and certainly tea and coffee kind of go in the same bucket. But once we start to escalate from there, maybe your lattes are okay, blah, blah, blah. But then we're going into all sorts of sugary things. Even when I went to Wegmans the other day and I tried to buy yogurt, I couldn't find any yogurt without sugar. They were out
Mhm.
of, I think, the brand that I typically get, and every single other brand, cane sugar was very early on in the list of ingredients. So, what strategies can people use to, I don't want to say combat this because I don't want to give the sense that it's a war, but I feel like we are up against a system that is not designed for optimal health. And there are many different reasons, that we can get into: money, different relationships, lobbying relationships. But even if we say, well, that's just the way it is, what can an individual do?
Hmm. And that's such a great, I mean, it's such a great point, especially because there's so much information out there, and you can either be incredibly uninformed or you can be what I would consider maybe sometimes too informed, where you're like actually really stressed about everything, right? So I have clients who come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, and I just read that, I'll use your example. Well, now my Starbucks cup, even the tea that I'm getting, it's the cup is lined with plastics. And so
Or
I,
the tea bag.
yes, yes.
So yeah, the tea bag.
Right. So I think it's important to start with a messaging of like, you're never going to completely avoid toxins, chemicals, microplastics, right? We just live in a world where we are going to be exposed to those things. So I think first is trying not to get too overwhelmed by the amount of things that we can do and should do to optimize our health. I think we really have to start with the the lowest hanging fruit, and for some people that can be just swapping out the amount of sugar that they're eating and starting to pay attention to that, or starting to add in one more vegetable a week that's different that they've never consumed. So I think the real goal as a society in terms of moving towards better health is, I think, obviously a less processed diet, right? We want to move away from the packaged foods, the canned foods, things like that, as much as we can, and as much as we can afford to do so. And so then number two, I would say the way that we eat. So many of us are eating on the go. We're eating really fast. We're not chewing our food. We're eating while we're answering emails. I think the way that we eat is also really important to consider. And then I think, shopping locally, I think we've lost touch with, some of that aspect of local produce and local farms. That is something that is really actually helpful for our health. We know that soil depletion is a big reason why our guts are not as diverse as they used to be, because of the soil that our food is grown in. I think those are three big ones, right? How we eat, removing the amount of processed foods that we're eating, and then trying to eat more local, and then cooking at home. Things like that. I think if you can simply just make one meal a week, if you're used to eating out 7 days a week, maybe one or two meals you start to move at home. When we cook at home, I mean, we're controlling the type of oil that we're using. We're not adding in a bunch of ingredients that might be, industrial thickeners, things that you would be surprised to know are in simple things like a salad dressing, or a marinade when you go out to eat at a restaurant. So I think cooking at home is another great tip for the listeners to say, if I can just do that, I mean, that's huge. Cooking from scratch at home, and it doesn't have to be complicated. There's so many easy, simple, delicious tasting recipes out there online. I think we can all do better by focusing on some of those things, and again, not thinking about the perfectionist mentality. Rather, what's my lowest hanging fruit? Is it just buying a lower sugar option for my yogurt, or is it, just adding in a vegetable at every single meal? That would be a huge win for one person.
Yeah, yeah. So since you're talking about emulsifiers and oils, it makes my brain go to the food label conversation. I want to talk
Mhm.
about this a little bit. I never used to read food labels. I sort of can't believe it considering my medical and science background, but it is what it is. And this is just another example of how you can get sort of hypnotized by what's going on, or not aware as you can be about something as basic as reading a label. And also, I created a story in my mind that the label was complicated, so I just didn't bother. And it's really not that complicated. If you look at a label, in my view, and you don't understand what you're reading, that's a pretty good sign that you probably don't want to be eating it. um,
Mhm.
but I would love to hear you talk about um, things to be aware of when you're looking at a label. I mean, I'll just give you one example. I like that Wegmans has a popcorn in a bag that's just olive oil and salt, because I
Mhm.
feel like if I don't want to make popcorn from scratch, I can feel pretty good about that. But the other day I picked the wrong bag up, which was some other kind. And I looked at the back, or the front said coconut oil. So I was like, okay, great. I was in a rush. I'm like, that's on my approved list. But then when I
Mhm.
got home, one of the ingredients was natural flavors, because it said coconut oil butter flavored. And as soon as I
Mhm.
saw flavored, I was like, oh, I'm screwed. And then I looked
Yeah.
on the back and I saw the dreaded natural flavors, which is such a sinister name because natural makes you think
Mhm.
that it's good. So let's talk
Mhm.
a little bit about food labels. What comes up for you?
Yeah, and I had a really great podcast interview with a woman, and she's in the food industry, and she's worked in a natural flavors lab. I can send you the link if you want to add it, but she kind of walks through like the nitty gritty of the natural flavors. So I think it's really interesting as a practitioner now to see what people are focusing on in terms of food labels, and it should be like the exact opposite of what they should be focusing on. So kind of starting with maybe what not to be so concerned about in terms of labels. People are still looking at calories and they're just only thinking about the calories and they're not considering where the calories are coming from, right?
Yeah, let me just stop you for one sec. I taught a yoga class recently, and this woman who was clearly over the age of 70 ran up to me after the class, and she was looking at her Apple Watch and she was so excited. She goes, I think I burned 250 calories. You think that's right? And I just wanted to say, oh my God, you darling woman, I'm so glad you're here. Go home and have some chicken. Like, don't
Yeah.
worry about the
Yeah.
calories.
Yes.
Who is
Yeah.
even thinking about calories?
I know. And I see this a lot and I work with a lot of like retired bodybuilding, individuals and they're just so focused on macros and calories. And we need to care more about where those calories and those macronutrients are coming from. Oh, it's only 2 grams of fat. That's great. It's so healthy. Okay, well, what else is in it to make up for the fact that fat makes it really palatable and it makes it really smooth in terms of its texture? So I want people to focus less on calories and less on what's above the actual ingredients list, because on a label, yes, we can be mindful of things like sodium, in canned goods and packaged foods, and we can be mindful of things like trans fats. We definitely don't want any trans fats in any product. But overall, we now know that cholesterol in foods is not going to impact our blood cholesterol the way that we thought it was. So we can say, don't worry about that. Where I really want people to start focusing on is right under the nutrition facts label is the ingredients list. And when you see that list, you're looking at whatever comes first is what the product is made most of. So in the terms of, the yogurt, for example, if sugar is the second ingredient on that list, then sugar is predominantly what's in that product. And that's why you love that yogurt, So
Yeah,
I
they're
think
adding
that,
it
and then there's yeah,
adding it for taste, right? There's no
right.
value. So it's purely to make it taste better.
Right, exactly. And then there's all these other ingredients that have been introduced to the food industry that are things like gums and thickeners, like xanthan gum, guar gum. There's things like artificial sweeteners, sucralose, aspartame. There's sugar alcohols, anything ending in OL, erythritol, maltitol. These can cause a lot of gas, bloating, digestive upset, cellulose gum. We see different stabilizers. There's research that shows that these can trigger inflammation in the gut. And so, there was always that kind of saying of don't, don't buy something if you can't pronounce it. And there's nuance to this because for a long time, no one knew how to pronounce quinoa. And if you had seen that on an ingredients list, they'd be like, oh my gosh, this is bad for you because I don't know what that word is. And then there's some products that might be fortified with B vitamins and the words that like might look really scary, but someone who's maybe plant-based might need that B12 fortification. But generally speaking, if you can simplify the ingredients list, you want to look where the fats and the carbs are coming from. We want them to come from places like avocado oil, coconut oil, or whole avocado, or things like eggs and meat and fish. Those fats are really healthy, right? We want to avoid things like hydrogenated oils, right, which are the sneaky trans fats. We want to avoid those thickeners and gums and artificial sweeteners. And we now have a part of the nutrition label that it has added sugars to it, right? So we can see total sugar for the product and then how much of those sugars was added, which is great. I think all consumers should go there and say, oh, wow, that's not naturally occurring, which we like naturally occurring sweetness from fruits and vegetables and things like that. But when we add in that extra sugar, we're losing nutritional value. So those are the things that I like clients to focus on. And then once they know what it's made of, then they can go back up and say, oh, that's a great source of fiber. I'm trying to get more fiber in my diet. But the fiber comes from flaxseed and almond flour. It doesn't come from, corn soluble fiber that's made in the lab, right? So then we're like, okay, that's a great source of fiber from a whole food product. This is a better choice. And so then we can see what the macronutrients are made of.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about something that was a huge reveal to me, the difference between the stuff in the aisles and the stuff in the refrigerated section. And when you were talking about preservatives and emulsifiers, if I just look at something like pickles or even condiments, I can go get pickles and sauerkraut in the aisle, but I can also get it in the refrigerated section. So tell me a little bit about the difference there.
Mm-hmm. People have talked or heard about fermented foods, and fermented foods are those that have been put in a solution. It's a food that's been put in a solution of water and salt. And the process, the chemical process that happens over time when you let that sit, creates live probiotics, live bacteria that has been shown in research to support gut health, immune function, etc. Pickled foods are different. So like sauerkraut, kimchi, those types of things, those are fermented foods that are in a refrigerated section, whereas in the aisles you have pickled foods, and it's in a solution of vinegar, and that doesn't contain live probiotics. It doesn't contain those bacteria. So that's a big misconception. Even pickles in the refrigerated section aren't fermented if they're sitting in vinegar. So I think that's important. A lot of people think that fermented foods include pickles, but they're two different things unless the cucumbers were fermented. Does that make sense?
Got it. So you eat something, you said water and salt,
Mm-hmm.
this chemical reaction that is the fermentation as the
Yes.
result.
Mm-hmm.
And when you eat that, it's like eating bacteria, but
Mm-hmm.
bacteria in a bad way. Like I touch something with bacteria on it and then I touch my nose and now I'm sick. Bacteria
Mm-hmm.
in a good way, like in the gut. Bacteria.
Yes. So when people hear about probiotic supplements, right, or like kombucha is a fermented food, for example, if you look at the different bacteria that are in that lactobacillus, bifido, bacillus coagulans, those are just random beneficial bacteria that I'm naming. Those are present in fermented foods in varying amounts, depending on how long they were fermented. But you can take a probiotic pill that gives you the very specific strains, or you can eat fermented foods, which is like taking a probiotic. You just don't know the specific dose and exactly what strains are in it, but they are beneficial bacteria, some of which are already in our gut that we're feeding more of.
Got it. Okay. Now, when you talk about taking probiotic pills, that leads me to another aha moment I had the other day, and I'm sort of ashamed to admit this, but I have a hard time swallowing pills. So I have a wide array of supplements I take that are gummies. And just
Mhm.
the other day, I happened to look at the back and realized every day I'm eating a bunch of gummies like sugar. I just had this aha moment one day. I was like looking at all my supplements. I'm like, this looks like gummy bears in this little dish I have. And so I'm curious, again, I know the amount of something is always a variable. And yet this is something that I'm taking every day. And there's about 10 different gummies I take between the vitamin D and the multivitamin and the probiotic, etc.
Mhm.
So how much of a concern is that for you?
I mean, I would say, again, lowest hanging fruit kind of situation. If you can find, so like vitamin D, for example, there's a great liquid that you can take that's got no sugar. Like Thorn Labs is a great brand. That's the one that I use. And you just put it right under your tongue. It absorbs through the thin skin in your mouth, and you don't have to swallow anything. There's also certain probiotics you can take, that aren't going to be in pill form as well, but there's specific strains that are more sensitive to, changes in environment that you can't. But what I would say was what I would say is that you should try to eliminate as many of the gummy vitamins as you can and keep the ones that are like, if it's a multivitamin, for example, you're not going to find a really great quality multivitamin that's liquid that doesn't have a lot of other weird additives in it. But I would swap the vitamin D, and I would maybe just swap what you can. And then I wouldn't worry about the other small amounts of sugar, knowing that you're already very health conscious and watching your total sugar intake. I mean, we're talking people that are getting up to like 40 to 50 grams of added sugars per day, which I know already by talking to you is not you, that
Yeah.
if you're having a few grams coming from your gummy vitamins, I would not stress about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I also wanted to bring that up because, back years ago, there weren't even gummy vitamins or
Mm-hmm.
gummy formats for a lot of supplements. And I feel like now it's sort of a lot of them come, and they come in pretty packages, and you can take a sleep aid and it's in the purple package and all that sort of stuff. You had mentioned before about oils, and I know that there are probably people listening who have questions about seed oils. I've heard seed oils are inflammatory. I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned before about I like the popcorn with olive oil. I feel good about olive oil as a type of oil. You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
avocado, coconut on sort of the beneficial list. So just tell us a little bit about what are oils that we should be concerned about. What's the effect of eating something with a particular kind of oil on it that's a negative effect?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important when I answer this, I want people listening to know that my answer is based on the research that I've seen, and it's based on my knowledge of what these types of fats are. And then there will be like a quick takeaway of, kind of how to sum it all up. So omega 3s, omega 6s, these are two types of fats that our body needs. Both of them are very important. When we have this really nice balance in our diet of omega 6s and omega 3s, that's when we see a less inflammatory state. We see the body running really smoothly. Now, in our standard American diet, these omega 6s make up the majority of what's in our diet. And so those omega 6s encompass seed oils, things like sunflower oil, safflower oil, rapeseed oil. Those or that does contain some omega 3s, but majority of people are getting plenty of omega 6s, peanut butter, almond butter, almonds. Omega 3s, however, on the other hand, are lacking in the standard American diet. These are going to be foods that are found in high fat fish, things like salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring. We find them in walnuts, flaxseed, chia seed. And so people aren't really getting many of these. And so the scale is very tipped, and that is a pro inflammatory state. So it's not so much as the omega 6 or the seed oils are necessarily bad. However, there's a caveat to that. Is it fried? Is it processed? Is it paired with a bunch of sugar? That's probably not good for you anyway. But it's not that these are bad and that you should completely avoid them. It's that you're probably already getting enough of them. And if you eat out all the time, you're probably getting too much of them, right? So we want to find ways that we can get more omega 3s in our diet and find that balance. Now, some research shows that these fats, these omega 6s themselves, might create some imbalance in like the immune system, for example, especially colon health, maybe increasing risk for colon cancer. There's still a lot we don't know, and it's really hard to say that this like X caused Z equals Y. Like it's not as simple as that with this type of research. So I think if there's a way that we should all be thinking about these is what form are they in? Are they in fried foods, packaged foods? Are they coupled with tons of sugar and unhealthy additives? Yeah, well, let's like reduce those for sure. Get more omega 3s in your diet. We know that we all need more of that. And we don't need to demonize them completely. We know that omega 6s in general are important, but we're talking like cold pressed, high quality omega 6s, not the fried, processed ones in general. We know those foods shouldn't make up the majority of our diet. Does that make sense? I know it's
No, it
such a
does. And
loaded, yeah.
Yeah, I like that you're a little more nuanced with it. And this sort of leads me to my next question. What are some of the things that sort of drive you crazy when you're like scrolling through social media? Maybe you see a particular headline or maybe a trend that you see with the clients that are coming to you. I think on this topic of seed oil, one of the things that drives me crazy is how people do demonize seed oils.
Mhm.
And then I go out to dinner and somebody's like, "Oh, you shouldn't order that because, oh, I read blah, blah, blah." And it's like, okay, take a breath. Let's live in a world of nuance. That's the world we live in. We don't live in a world of absolutes, right? So, what are some of the things that, if there's something that comes to mind that just sort of makes you shake your head as a person with ear?
And let me also say, because I didn't share this in terms of my journey to becoming a dietitian and getting to where I am today, I suffered from really bad orthorexia where I was like terrified of certain foods because of what I had watched online as a young teenager. And let me tell you, when I became the cleanest possible seed oil free, like person that ever walked the earth, I was at my unhealthiest I have ever been. So
And
I
just
just want to
dyslexia is.
so orthorexia is when you have an incredibly unhealthy relationship with food. You're afraid of like touching anything that's not deemed healthy, right? So I was so afraid of certain oils or sugars or things like that that I then like couldn't touch them. And a lot of that also stemmed from my issues with gut health and the symptoms that I got from eating certain foods, but oh my gosh, I was at my unhealthiest. So I want to stress that and share that part of my journey because now I have a very balanced approach. I recognize, what a balanced diet is, and I have blood work and stool tests and the mental health to show you that I am the healthiest version of myself right now where I am. So, what do I see online that that really grinds my gears? I mean, parasite cleanses, detoxes, young woman fasting, or even in perimenopause who are fasting and trying to lose weight with these extreme diets. Any sort of extreme or dogma in the nutrition and wellness industry is the biggest red flag to me that they're either trying to sell you a program or a supplement or basically just trying to prey off of our vulnerability as humans and this fear of like being dirty or like completely uncleansed of every impurity of our life. I mean, that is such a rooted theme in the wellness industry. So anything along those lines just totally turns me off. I am so over that. And this is what I do for a living. I coach people with tons of chronic diseases and some of the most complex cases that come out of the top hospitals in the world. And I can tell you that none of those things are what move the needle for people. They are not what is changing their life. It's a healthy, balanced approach, a comprehensive view of their entire outlook and trajectory of wellness all together consistently over time.
Got
So,
it. So, I'm thinking again, all around the listener who's listening, who is absorbing all this info. I'm also thinking about when you mentioned before, when you meet with a client, some of the tests that you do, where their primary care physician in their annual physical is probably not even recommending these. So, I would love for you to talk a little bit about what can somebody do in terms of proactive testing and medical care?
mhm,
Because, I mean, we can have a whole conversation about our medical care system in the United States, and obviously there's a lot of angles we can look at that through. But I think at the end of the day, every single person still has some level of control over what they're doing, notwithstanding if you don't have health insurance, that's again another conversation. But let's
mhm,
just stay in this lane of what can we, not even what can we be doing as individuals throughout the year in our interface with medical professionals so that we are advocating for ourselves, not just checking a box. And in many cases, these primary care doctors are overloaded with patients and won't
mhm,
oftentimes delve into any questioning about lifestyle. So tell us what you think on that.
mhm. Yeah, I think the point that you made about there's many angles we can look at it, right? We're seeing incredible amounts of burnout among healthcare professionals. So, I've had horrible experiences with doctors in my past that, and I've also had great experiences, but at the end of the day, the reason why I'm in private practice is because it's a broken system overall. So what can we do to advocate? Well, first of all, that is what we can do. We can advocate, right? We can show up prepared to a doctor's appointment and say, listen, this is what's going on. Here's what I'm going to ask for in terms of labs, and you let me know what we can get covered and what makes sense for us here. What can we do in the scope of practice that physician or provider can do? Get it done. So they usually can run at least your basic labs, right? They can do a complete blood count or basic metabolic panel. Sometimes they might add on a vitamin D. They might add on some nutrition related labs like zinc, magnesium. Those are not out of scope of the practice of what these practitioners sometimes will do. A lot of my clients are able to get these done with their doctor. There might even be some hormone testing that they can do. They can look at their thyroid. A lot of doctors will run a full panel that includes not just TSH, but T4, T3, TPO antibodies. If the client's presenting in a way that might indicate that they have some sort of autoimmune thyroid going on. So you can get a lot of those labs done. If not, Quest Labs offers an incredibly affordable way to just do these yourself. I can also put in orders for my clients to do these in a more, cost effective way, but anyone can typically go to Quest Labs and get vitamin D, B12, complete blood count, basic metabolic panel. They can look at further markers for cardiovascular health, like our apolipoproteins, which are really important for particle size. And I think just knowing trends of what those labs look like over time is really important. And I love the clients that I have that have like a spreadsheet of year by year so they can say, you know what? My white blood cell count always runs low. So it's not concerning that it's still low. Or my ferritin randomly plummeted this year. What's going on? Is there something going on in my digestive system? Unfortunately, we have to play a large role in our healthcare because physicians don't have time. Unless you live in a place where for some reason they're not booking out, months to even see you, they don't have time to dig to the level that you need them to. So we have to learn, we have to advocate. There are people that are lucky enough to be able to work with dietitians or functional medicine doctors or people that will actually help them do all this stuff. But as general consumers looking for really the baseline, show up and ask for those labs to really assess thyroid, cholesterol, nutrition related labs, the basic metabolic panel, at least have those done at least once a year so that you're keeping tabs on anything that might be showing up for you so that we can be preventative about our healthcare.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the other thing that I'm sort of hearing, and I know from just reading other things and listening to other people, and definitely as I'm reading Casey Means's book, she's admitting this as a physician, that the lack of nutrition as part of the training of physicians is quite apparent. And so physicians, when you were describing again this idea of, oh, I'm having diarrhea or stomach cramps, well, let me just automatically write you a script to get a colonoscopy. But what about all the other things that I could be doing in between? It could even be that the physician has a lack of knowledge around nutrition. So I want to just, I just feel like as individuals, we can then seek out someone like yourself to fill in that gap.
Well, and here's the problem, dietitians were not meant to be, they weren't originally, our career started in a hospital. Why? Because dietitians are nutrition and doctors receive 25 to 35 hours of nutrition education their entire training, right? So the medical system was actually designed for dietitians and doctors to work together. But for whatever reason, along the way, doctors just, I don't know, they just stopped liking us as dietitians. And this is why so many dietitians moved out of the medical setting because we were so tired of feeling underappreciated, right? Meanwhile, we're in there providing tube feed calculations for people that are on life support, children with burn in the burn unit who need to be on parental nutrition. So we know the value of what we do, but unfortunately, the system seems to have lost that respect. And that's why we're now here. But it was the way that it was supposed to work is, oh, you have diabetes. Okay, the dietitian is in the other room. You're going to go now meet with them. And I used to be that dietitian. I would be in the other room. They would go see the doctor. Then they'd come to me. We'd talk nutrition, and they'd get this holistic experience that was the closest thing you're ever going to get to it. And it's just not that way anymore. Unless you're in a, more critical care setting, you're not going to step into the next room and meet with your dietitian, right? And
Totally.
that's just unfortunate.
Yeah, that is such a great model, and it's unfortunate that doesn't exist anymore. I
Mhm.
have one more thought before we wrap up, and that has to do with advocating for yourself when you have a symptom or symptoms.
Mhm.
I feel like, I have a number of acquaintances that are women in their 50s and early 60s that I know from talking to them that a lot of their symptoms could be related to an estrogen drop, but because sometimes people don't make that connection. Like I didn't even realize until very recently the relationship between estrogen drop and cholesterol increase.
Mhm.
So there again is just so much educating we can all do for ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about, especially given the strained physician, the strained primary care physician, or even orthopedics, when you go with your quote unquote frozen shoulder or whatever physical sciatica, whatever symptomology you have, that many women in particular, the doctor will say, oh, this is blah, 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 do this. And, or I'm not really sure what it is, or it might be in your head, or take an Advil, or here's Valium, or, and the person's feeling like, I don't really feel like I'm getting treated the way I want to be treated. How
Mhm.
can we help that person?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is a really important thing for everybody to know. I think number one is if you have the opportunity to go in and, figure out if it's even the right provider for you. So from day one, what's your approach? I'm just curious. This is the first time you meet with them. They just want to do like a quick runaround. What's your approach? Are you open to natural and alternative remedies? Like, what's your view on that? If I'm someone that wants to, my goals are really to avoid medication and get a holistic approach. Is that something you're going to be able to support me with? So, I mean, you're literally walking in there, kind of deciding, it's like dating, are we a good fit for each other? Because sometimes people really just want that doctor that's just going to give them a pill if they have pain. And unfortunately, some of us are the problem, right? Where we do go in and we just want it, and if we don't get it, we're pissed, right? And then we go back and then we're mad at them because we didn't get the pill
Mhm.
or the sugar in the
Or didn't
grocery
solve the
store.
problem.
Yes, exactly. So it's important to understand, is this doctor even the right fit for you? Because if they are gaslighting you, if they're not making you feel heard, that's a huge red flag. If they genuinely don't know, kudos to them for saying, I don't really know, but this is something we could try. Let's talk it through. That's a good provider. But you want to go in from the get-go knowing like what they need to know what your goals are, because some people really do just want a pill, quick fix, but some people do want to wait it out. They have more time. They're not looking for that instant gratification. And if the doctor knows that, they might be more likely to say, let's wait it out. Maybe look into this, maybe look into that. But that would be a really good first step. Now, let's say you're in a bind where you can't get into another doctor for like over a year and this is your only solution. Go prepared. Just simply bringing a notebook and a pen with you to an appointment can drastically change the care that you get. You'd be surprised if you show up with a pen and a paper, they're like, this person means business. They are on top of it. They're proactive about their health. And then you can present them with research. You could, if there's people that you're following there, you're reading books from doctors and they're giving you research studies, pull the research study up, print it out, bring it to your doctor. Maybe they'll read it. You never know. Like they might get pissed at you and take offense to the fact that you're trying to share some information that might help you, but maybe they don't have time to read research and maybe they will take that home and take it into consideration. So there's a variety of things that we can do and that I empower my clients to do so that when they show up, they're feeling like they're getting the best possible experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have one more question that just came to my mind,
Yeah.
and I think this is so important. And as a yoga teacher, this really is central in my mind as well when I work with people. You mentioned stress, and I don't think a lot of times people think about stress when we're talking about nutrition, and they don't often
Hmm.
think about stress when they think about medical, clinical, diagnostic type problems they're having. So, what comes up for you when you hear stress? What's its impact on how our body's working?
Stress is the silent killer. That is so true. And I know in my own personal journey, I was so close to like feeling what I would consider like 95%, but I was just not taking into consideration how stress was impacting me. Whether you have autoimmune disease, whether you have cancer, whether you have inflammatory bowel disease, stress is inflammatory. It changes your bacteria in your gut. It can make your gut more leaky. It can impact the way you absorb nutrients. It can reduce stomach acid or increase stomach acid, right? Which can impact the ability to digest, absorb. It can create reflux type symptoms. Stress can completely throw your body out of balance in so many different ways. And we're talking chronic stress. We're not talking, I had a hard meeting today and I got really stressed during the meeting and then I went home and had a great time with my family. We're talking chronic stress where, you're a type A person, you are over exercising, you are under fueling, you are in a toxic relationship. Like we're talking chronic stress, or it could just be a poor diet, right? That's a form of stress on the body. So thinking about all those things, and when I talk to clients about it, I think of a stress bucket. So if you're a CrossFit athlete, that's a form of stress. If you are a CEO of a company, that's a form of stress. So what's in your stress bucket, and is it getting way too full? And if it is, that's when we see autoimmune disease flare ups. That's when we see food sensitivities. We see digestive complaints, migraines, thyroid issues. Like stress throws everything off. It is foundational to anything that you're working on from a health perspective. It cannot be ignored.
Yeah, I think too, when you were talking about stress bucket, and I can speak from experience because I'm sort of a control freak. I mean, I like to be in control of everything. And so one of the things that I try to do to feel less stress is just stop trying to be in control of everything. If the house is a little messy, fine. If I didn't get to the grocery store and I eat at Sweetgreen instead, fine. If my boyfriend's in the kitchen and it's a mess, fine. Just saying I don't need to control everything as a selfish way to relieve stress for me. But I think it's just so important when you make all those connections, it just demonstrates it's not just what we're putting in our body, it's our mind body connection. How are we feeling? And
Mm-hmm.
that's oftentimes, even when you were describing eating, I think sometimes when I'm watching TV and eating, or
Mm-hmm.
if I'm having a conversation with Ben about like a heated topic and eating,
Mm-hmm.
right? I end up feeling indigestion after. So
Mm-hmm.
even though that might not seem stressful, it's certainly not helping my
Right.
nutrition be absorbed in
Yeah.
a healthy
Right.
way.
It's true. And you and I are very similar in what you just described, like especially like my space being clean. And that's why I now have one space in my house that if I need to go there,
Yeah,
it's clean, right?
yeah,
So I think the step one is being aware of it, being aware of how stress is showing up for you, how it's showing up in the body. And that's the most important thing, I think, is just accepting that, yeah, this is part of what I need to work on and I need to make it a priority. And then having tools that you can use. Obviously, yoga is such a great tool like that. Made a world of a difference for me in my gut healing journey. And but there's breath work. There's closing your eyes for 3 seconds and just taking 3 deep belly breaths. There's stop checking social media for a day. There's so many things that we have access to that are so good to support our nervous system and this vagus nerve connection between our gut and our brain that it just can't be ignored. And we all really do need some level of support with it. And we have all these tools that are accessible.
Yeah. I feel like in listening to you, it's almost like we have to, not that we have to, the idea that putting ourselves first is actually a life-saving measure. And even when I think about like a busy mom, who's always feeling like I never have time for myself, or that corporate woman who feels like
Mhm.
I'm always eating on the go. It's like, yeah, I get it. And if you put yourself first, your longevity will increase and your production and productivity will increase so much more. And you'll probably prevent a lot of health problems that you could be developing. So it's like, yeah, I get it in the moment. It might feel like it's a pain in the butt to do those things, but they could actually have the biggest impact on everything.
I mean, in the past year, off the top of my head, I've had women who quit their jobs. I've had clients who left relationships. I have clients who have moved locations strictly because it wasn't supporting their lifestyle and their overall health. That is courage and it is hard, but that is self care. That is putting yourself first. And I still meet with all those people. They are thriving. They are thriving in a way that they are like, wow, like what an incredible thing to change. People think we're just going to talk about nutrition. No, we're going to talk about how that relationship with that you're in, you're not going to feel good in your home, so there's so much that goes into it, but ultimately your message of self-care is care, right? It is just the most important thing we can all focus on, especially in the world that we live in today and everything going on.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word courage. I use that word a lot because most of my work is helping yoga teachers feel confident in
Mhm.
teaching. And it
Mhm.
comes both from sort of the academic understanding of anatomy, applying that to cueing and sequencing. It also, though, comes from sort of being able to walk in a room with people you don't know and lead them through this movement practice that's been around for thousands of years and not be triggered
Mhm.
by imposter syndrome or feeling nervous that people are judging you, or feeling nervous about I'm going to forget my sequence. And there's like this whole nervous system regulation that has to happen over time if you're going to
Mhm.
feel confident. And I loved when you said courage, because I think a lot of times it can be that people don't have the confidence to advocate for themselves with their doctor, to speak up in that relationship, to,
Mhm.
and it does take courage, and that's why it is personal growth. And I love how you said it just sort of permeates everything that they do in such
Mhm.
a positive way. So
Mhm.
it's just all the more around this idea. A lot of what I'm shifting this year in my own offers and messaging is around confidence in general for women, not just in the context of teaching yoga, because a lot of what I've learned in working with yoga teachers is applicable to women in
Mhm.
general when it comes
Sure.
to the methodology that I've created. So I just love those stories of amazing leapfrogging growth that people do. And
Mhm.
it's like, wow, I'm so surprised. I had no idea, that living in a place maybe where I'm primarily walking has had such a positive impact versus living far away from everything and I have to drive everywhere to get
Mhm.
coffee and grocery store and blah blah blah. So
Mhm.
those are like the most inspiring stories. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. They inspire me. It's like my clients, they're so life-giving and it's human connection, right? That's what it's all about here. And especially as women, standing together and inspiring each other and encouraging each other. I think that's really what it's all about. And, we can't get by doing life alone.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing that's inherent in those kinds of stories is it gives somebody listening hope that
Hmm.
could be in a situation like that, that might not right now listening to you feel like they have the courage, although they're hearing what's possible if
Hmm.
they just take a couple of steps forward. So,
Yeah.
having said that, as we close this, why don't you let people know how to get in touch with you and where you are on social media? Of course, I'm going to include all the handles in the show notes. Just share it though verbally so people can hear it.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to get in touch with me, I am Erin at nutritionrewired.com. You can go to my website, nutritionrewired.com. My handle is Nutrition Rewired on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. My podcast is Nutrition Rewired. Try to keep it very simple all across the board.
Yeah.
Yep. And if anyone ever just wants to reach out or anything, just share a tidbit if something resonated with you in Karen and my discussion today. Would love to hear from anyone. It just, yeah, it was such a pleasure chatting with you. And that will stick with me. I just don't want to die from something that I had control of. I love that. It's just
Yeah.
there's a motivation there and a good reminder that we do have this incredible power to take control of our health. So
Yeah. And it kind of feeds my controlling personality in a good way, where I'm like, okay,
sure.
if I can control this, it's something that I can leverage my control positively, not
Hmm.
to create stress, but in actuality to decrease stress and
Hmm.
disease. So
Right.
yeah, you can take that to heart. That's
I love
my
it.
driving force, when it comes to my physical health and mental health. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your personal story. I was so touched by
Yeah.
that. I think it's just so great to hear from you with your expertise and also tying it to that. So thank
Mhm.
you for your honesty and your time. This will actually, today's Tuesday. This will go live Monday. I go
Great. Okay.
Monday. I like to really have a close period of time between when I meet with somebody and when it goes live. So it's like timing wise, things that you're saying are like relevant in today's,
Great.
because
Awesome.
everything sort of shifts, right? There's always changes in the world. So this will go up
Yeah.
Monday. I'll send you the link and
Awesome.
sharing it all over the place. So
Yeah, I'll be sharing it too. Thanks so much, Karen. It was so great
yeah.
chatting with you, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Okay. All right.
All
Bye bye.
right. Bye.